Croissant. This is James, aka JP Harker, coming to you with another video. Look at two books that I have read recently, which is Tales from the Perilous Realm, J.R.R. Tolkien, and Karate-do, My Way of Life, by Gichin Funakoshi, or Funakoshi Sensei. A little bit different from one another, I know. I'm going to start with this one. Now, mainly because my finger's holding in a page from something I want to quote later. Now, this wasn't what I expected it to be, and I mentioned this in the video where I had this as my TBR, on my TBR. I'd thought this would be the sort of high fantasy, quote-unquote, that I'm used to from Tolkien, and it isn't. There's a little bit of that sort of thing, but the Perilous Realm is, as Tolkien says in here, the land of fairy. And it is not about Middle-earth, it's about fairy tales. So we have, the first one is Rover Random. Rover Random. How dare I let my accent show. And it's about a talking dog toy. As in, it's a dog who can talk and is turned into a toy. And goes to see the man in the moon. And goes to see spirits in the ocean and has arguments with wizards. And it's a sweet story about a toy dog because a little boy finds a toy dog and then loses the toy, and the dog wants to be back with the boy even though he doesn't know the boy's name, and he goes on all these adventures, and it's nice. It's just not what I expected. And oddly, once I was past that, it actually got to a little bit closer to the sort of thing I did expect. So Farmer Giles of Ham is slightly more what one might think of as fantasy, even though it's sort of the 19th century. And it's about a farmer with a blunderbuss who accidentally has to defend his country from a dragon. Because why wouldn't he? And it's full of little, not quite jabs at the genre, but little Tolkien's own take at the genre. And it's done in a respectful way that's also quite a funny way. And it's not quite a kid's bedtime story, and it's not quite an adult story, but it's somewhere in between. And it's a semi-serious story, but with lots of elements of comedy. And it just worked. It just worked really well. Oddly, the one I thought I'd like most, which is The Adventures of Tom Bombadil. That one was only okay. It's a lot of poetry. It's all right. Smith of Wootton Major just didn't stick in my head. And Leaf by Niggle, I only found out by reading it afterwards, is something that Tolkien didn't really like. He's famous for saying he disliked allegory, because whenever people said, oh, is Sauron Hitler, and is the ring an allegory for nuclear weaponry and all of that, he said, I cordially dislike allegory. But Leaf by Niggle clearly is, because it's somebody who is obsessively trying to complete this painting, and everything else just becomes an accessory to that, and it all combines together with this one obsession. And it's quite clearly Tolkien putting a bunch of stuff into his, Middle-earth is the term we tend to use, but I think he called it his secondary world, and making all of his clever ideas about fairy stories, or most of them, consistent with this. And I found the concept more interesting than the story itself, to be honest. It's Farmer Giles of Ham, that was the one. That was the one that really stuck as that's a good story. But what's interesting about this is it isn't just the stories. At the end, we have an essay on fairy stories by Tolkien, and it is dry reading for the most part. I will warn you of that now. But it's interesting and has a couple of little gems. One of them, and I'm sure I've heard him use this expression before, in using escape, the critics have chosen the wrong word, and they are confusing, not always by sincere error, the escape of the prisoner with the flight of the deserter. And I do like that, because when some people look down on reading things like fantasy and they say, oh, it's just silly, it's just escapism. I think, yes, it is escapism, but escapism in a good way, of getting out of the routine of our everyday lives and into something fantastic. That's always my defense, and it's a nice little phrase that I may start using there. The other bit that I've marked, it is often wondered upon, would Tolkien have liked the films? And he would have hated the Hobbit films because all Tolkien fans hate the Hobbit films. But would he have liked the Lord of the Rings trilogy? I think there's aspects of it that he would have enjoyed seeing his world come to life. But there's a little line in here, drama is naturally hostile to fantasy. Fantasy, even in the simplest kind, hardly ever succeeds in drama, when that is presented as it should be, visibly and audibly. Fantastic forms are not to be counterfeited. And he goes on to say about things like Shakespeare, where if you've got a talking animal, it's a comic thing, you don't take it seriously. And so at a glance that says, well, he obviously wouldn't approve of the films because drama doesn't work with fantasy. But this was a man who'd never heard of the concept of CGI, or even of much in the way of practical effects. I'm not sure when Jason and the Argonauts came out, but I doubt if Professor Tolkien had gone to see it. And things have come so far, not the terrible CGI in The Hobbit, but things have come so far with things you can do with the matte paintings and the miniatures and the CGI and the practical effects and the costumes and all of it combined. I think he would have been impressed by what came out of it. He may not have approved of all of it, and he may have come away from it thinking, well, it was okay. But he would have been impressed to see his world created like that, because in this essay, he clearly hasn't got, he didn't like technology, he clearly hasn't got the concept of this is where technology could lead us. It could lead us to a place where fantasy can be shown in drama. When I die, I'll make sure to go and find him wherever he is, and I shall ask him about it. I'll join the queue of people asking him about it. But, sorry, I'll wave it up once again. That's Tales from the Perilous Realm by J.R.R. Tolkien. It's got some nice illustrations. Sorry, not in the name. Yeah, there we are. Some nice little illustrations, courtesy of Alan Lee. The other book, if you're a karate student, and especially a Shotokan student, back to that word later, you've probably heard of this or read it. If you're not, you almost certainly haven't. This is one for the martial arts geeks. And it's, as the title suggests, Karate-do, My Way of Life. It's a little bit about Funakoshi Sensei's life and his relationship with karate. Very briefly, this is the man who popularized karate, which is an Okinawan art, in mainland Japan. And as a result of it being popularized in Japan, it became worldwide. It might have spread from Okinawa with all the US troops, which are what brought it to the West in such a way, but I doubt if it would have come anywhere close to being the worldwide phenomenon that it became, if it weren't for this man. And he goes on a little bit about that, but a lot of it is, like these things are, stories of his own training and his childhood. Like every martial arts master in the world, apparently he was a sickly child. And that has just become a joke among my friends, because you look at stories of Ueshiba, you look at stories of Takamatsu, you look at stories of this gentleman here, you look at stories of all of these great martial arts masters. Nearly always it says, I was a sickly child at the start, and I took up martial arts to become strong. And apparently it worked, because the man died in his 90s, I think, and according to him never had to see a doctor. Whether that is an exaggeration, I don't know. But he was a very healthy and long-lived man. Interestingly, he didn't like the name Shotokan, which is the style most widely practiced by the people who learn from him. There's also Shotokai, and there's elements of Shotokan in Kyokushin. I know it's also Gojo Ryu. But he didn't like that, because Shotokan was the name of his dojo. So to him, well, that's what Shotokan is. And he didn't like the idea of styles and the sort of factionalism that would come along with it. So that was interesting to see. It was interesting how honoured he was to meet Jigoro Kano, the founder of judo. And it was interesting to see his disdain for the sort of magical Hojo Undo that you see from some karateka, of the sort of smashing boards and bricks and breaking baseball bats over your shin and all that. This man, who is such a founding father in modern karate, thought, yeah, that's all rubbish, mate. What's the point? It's not karate. And yeah, it makes me think of, slight sidetrack, it makes me think of when Hatsumi Sensei had put on a demonstration for his teacher, Takamatsu Sensei, where he had all of his students doing various martial artsy things, but also doing rolls and flips and cartwheels out of things. And Takamatsu apparently just went, yeah, that's nice. Not martial arts though, is it? And I rather like that the showmanship that one often sees in modern martial arts just isn't there in the original people who really understood it. They say, no, it's not like that. So I liked that. It's a short book. It's 100 odds? Yeah, 120 pages, 122. So if you have any interest in martial arts, it's worth a look. If you are a karate student, and especially a Shotokan student, how dare I use the phrase, I would definitely read this because it's well worth a look. Apparently he has also written a book on kata, which I may end up looking through, I may not, because kata does change and evolve. But yeah, I am glad that I looked through this. It's a little less, I'm going to be excommunicated, it's a little less self-indulgent than Hatsumi's books. It's, for all of his I'm so healthy because of karate, it's fairly humble about his own life. Even some fascinating things like being born at the Meiji Restoration and resisting cutting off his top knot and all of that stuff. It's still quite a humble story overall. So I can recommend this one. I can. Karate-do My Way of Life by Gichin Funakoshi. Right. That was a bit of a rambly one I went off on, I know, because there's such a danger of me going off on one when it comes to martial arts. So I think you may think I've rambled, I actually kept that quite concise by my standards. And on that note, I shall leave you there. This is James, aka JP Harker. Hwyl fawr.